He offered his jacket to a shivering woman at the bus stop, not knowing she was a CEO who would change his life forever. The wind cut through New York like a blade, snow falling steady from the gray sky. At a nearly deserted bus stop under a flickering street lamp, Henry stood hunched in a fraying olive jacket, clutching a worn manila folder tight to his chest. Inside were 5 resumes, 5 silent rejections. He exhaled slowly, watching his breath fog in the cold night air. 46 years old, former construction engineer, widower, father, and for now homeless. The red glow of a nearby pharmacy sign blinked 8:41 p.m. The bus was late, then through the snow, a woman appeared. She looked 30-some in a business skirt and blouse, no coat, heels clicking on the pavement. Her wet hair clung to her face, arms wrapped tightly around herself. She stopped beneath the same awning, breath short, hands shaking. Henry tried not to stare, but her presence was striking, clean, polished, yet clearly suffering in the cold. She rubbed her bare hands together, failing to warm them. The wind howled. She flinched, curled inward, and Henry glanced at her again. His jacket wasn't much, but it was something. Without a word, he shrugged off the coat. The cold bit hard. He stepped toward her and held it out. Startled, she said, "You don't have to do that." Henry gave her a tired smile. "I've already lost enough today. This coat, it's the only thing I have left to give." She hesitated. "But you need it more than I do." Still, he gently draped it over her shoulders. "Not tonight." The warmth startled her. It smelled of soap, maybe coffee. Comfort. She pulled it tighter without meaning to. "Thank you," she whispered. He nodded, folding his arms to keep warm. After a moment, she turned to him. "What's your name?" "Henry." "I'm Claire." The low rumble of a bus broke the silence. Headlights pierced the snow as it pulled up. Claire moved toward it, then turned back. "Do you have somewhere to go?" Henry shrugged. "Somewhere," he said, not explaining it was the backseat of a rusted truck behind a warehouse. She reached into her purse and handed him a card. "In case you ever need anything." He took it, slipping it into his folder without looking. He didn't expect to use it. Claire stepped onto the bus, glanced back once more, the coat wrapped around her like armor. Henry watched until the bus disappeared into the snow. Alone again, he stood shivering. He looked up at the sky, then down at the empty street. "Maybe tomorrow," he whispered, then turned and walked into the night. Henry walked slowly through the quiet back streets, snow crunching under his worn shoes. He reached his truck just after 9. The old '98 Chevy was rusted, the heater long dead. Inside was a nest of blankets, a pillow, and a lunchbox tucked beneath the dashboard. He climbed in, shut the door, and sat in silence. From the glove compartment, he pulled out a small tin box and opened it. Inside was a faded photograph. His wife, Lily, smiling bright, and their son, Noah, around 7, with a crooked grin. "Good night, Lily," Henry whispered. "Good night, Noah." He had once been Henry Miles, structural engineer. He built things, schools, homes, hospitals. He had a wife who taught kindergarten, laughed often. Their son had her laugh. They weren't rich, but they were content. Then the cancer came. Lily was gone in 9 months. Henry left his job to care for her. Afterward, everything unraveled. Bills piled up, savings drained. He sold the house, moved with Noah into smaller and smaller spaces until there was nothing left but the truck. He tried to shield his son. He turned the back seat into a spaceship, canned soup into adventures. Every morning he walked Noah to school, clean-shaven, shirt tucked in. "Why do you still cut your hair?" a shelter worker had once asked. Henry smiled. "Because my son needs to believe things can get better and I need to look like I believe that too." He worked whatever jobs he could find until last fall. A social worker stepped in. Said it wasn't safe. Said Noah needed stability. Henry didn't argue. Through blurry eyes, he signed the papers, hugged his son, and promised, "Just for now, I'll come back for you." Since then, every day had been a climb.
He sent resumes, stood in job fair lines, studied codes at the library.
He was building a plan slowly, quietly. Tonight had made that plan feel further than ever. He thought of Claire, the woman at the bus stop.
He didn't know why he'd done it.
Maybe because she reminded him of Lily, or maybe he just needed to feel like he could still do something good.
Outside, the snow kept falling.
Henry pulled a blanket over himself and shut his eyes. Claire stepped into the sleek lobby of her apartment building, the warmth wrapping around her. She made her way to the elevator, still wrapped tightly in the jacket. She stepped into her penthouse apartment on the 28th floor and was immediately greeted by silence. Claire dropped her purse and slowly peeled off the jacket. She was about to set it aside when her fingers brushed against something in the inner pocket. Curious, she reached in and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was a child's drawing done in crayon. Two stick figures stood hand in hand under a crooked sun. One was labeled Dad, the other me.
A small heart floated between them.
At the bottom, in uneven handwriting, were the words, "I love you, Daddy."
Noah.
Claire stood frozen. She stared at the drawing, her throat tightened. This wasn't just a man who had given her his coat. This was a father. A father who still carried a piece of his child close to his heart. A father who had nothing yet still chose to give as she looked around her apartment. High ceilings, designer furniture, glass walls, not a single photo frame or personal touch. A space designed for success, not warmth. Claire folded the drawing gently and placed it on her lap. Then, without thinking, she pulled the coat close and hugged it tightly to her chest. And suddenly, without warning, tears welled up in her eyes. She hadn't cried in years. Not since she was a little girl, cold and hungry, sitting on the steps of her church, hoping someone would notice her. That night, someone had, a man with kind eyes. He had taken off his coat and wrapped it around her shoulders. He hadn't said much, just smiled and told her she'd be okay. It had been the first act of kindness she remembered. Claire sniffed and wiped her cheek.
She wasn't the same girl anymore.
She had clawed her way out of the foster system, worked through college on scholarships and sheer determination, built Infinity Group from a single app idea to one of the most influential tech companies on the East Coast. But somewhere along the way, she had forgotten what it meant to need, what it meant to give. Tonight, a stranger reminded her. And for the first time in a very long time, Claire Langston cried, not because she was broken, but because something inside her had been gently, beautifully cracked open. The next morning, Claire sat at her desk, the skyline stretched endlessly beyond the windows, but her eyes were fixed on the crumpled drawing in her hand. She had barely slept. She kept replaying the night before. She reached into the top drawer and pulled out a small silver bell. Moments later, her assistant, Rachel, stepped in.
"Yes, Miss Langston. I need you to help me find someone," Claire said. "His name is Henry. I don't have a last name.
He was at the 56th and Madison bus stop last night around 8:30.
He gave me his jacket. I want to find him."
Over the next few days, Claire's instructions were carried out with quiet efficiency. They pulled traffic camera footage, traced bus routes, cross-referenced entry logs. Finally, Rachel returned with a thin folder.
"His name is Henry Miles," she said. "Used to be a structural engineer. No recent employment records. No permanent address."
Claire flipped through the pages. A copy of an old driver's license photo. A LinkedIn profile frozen in time.
"Where is he now?"
Rachel shifted. "There's an old pickup truck parked behind a warehouse.
He's been seen sleeping in it."
Claire stood.
"I want to go there."
An hour later, Claire sat in the backseat of a black sedan as it wound through streets far removed from boardrooms and glass towers. The driver pulled up near the warehouse. Claire saw it immediately. The old Chevy tucked into the shadows. She stepped out into the chill and walked slowly toward the truck. Through the windshield, she could just make out a figure. As she got closer, the door creaked open.
Henry stepped out, blinking.
He looked at her with confusion, then recognition. "Claire," he said, his voice rough with sleep and surprise. She offered a small smile.
"Hi, Henry."
He looked down at himself, at his wrinkled clothes, the truck behind him.
"What are you doing here?"
"I came to find you," she said simply.
He frowned. "Why?"
She hesitated. "Because I couldn't stop thinking about what you did, about the kind of person who gives his only coat to a stranger."
Henry gave a bitter laugh. "You didn't have to track me down for that."
"It's not about thanks," she said. "It's about not letting something good disappear without being seen."
For a long moment, they stood in silence. Henry finally exhaled. "You came all this way just for that?" Claire nodded.
"Yes, and maybe something more."
The next time Claire saw Henry, he was bent over a stack of cinder blocks at a construction site on the edge of Queens.
When he took his break, Claire stepped out of her car and walked toward him.
Henry looked up and did a double take. She handed him a cup of coffee. "Thought you might like something warm." He took it hesitantly.
"Would you come with me?" she asked.
"I'd like to show you something."
They drove in silence. When they arrived at Infinity Group's downtown headquarters, Henry hesitated in the marble-floored lobby.
"I don't belong here," he said under his breath.
Claire turned to him.
"Just come upstairs."
They entered a private conference room.
Claire offered him a seat.
"So, what's all this about?"
Henry asked.
Claire leaned forward.
"I didn't come to thank you.
I came because you made me remember something I forgot."
"You reminded me that real change doesn't always start with innovation or strategy. Sometimes it starts with kindness."
She slid a folder across the table. Inside was a job proposal, a new position, Cultural and Human Values Advisor.
Henry frowned. "What is this?"
"It's a new role, one I created. Someone who sits in on department decisions, training programs, to talk about people, values, compassion. You'd share your experiences, help shape the heart of this company."
Henry laughed awkwardly. "Claire, look at me. I sleep in a truck. You were an engineer. I haven't built anything in years."
"You built a moment I'll never forget," Claire said softly. "This isn't charity," she continued. "You know what it's like to be invisible, to be passed over, and yet you stopped in the cold and gave your only coat to a stranger.
That tells me more about leadership than any resume ever could."
He struggled for words.
"I'm not qualified."
Claire leaned forward. "You don't need a degree to teach people how to care because you live it every day. You don't need credentials to teach people how to be kind because you've lived it, and that's more powerful than anything you'll ever put on paper." For the first time in years, he felt something flicker inside him. Hope Henry sat alone on the bench outside the building, the job proposal resting unread in his lap.
He couldn't do it.
The offer felt like a trap wrapped in kindness. Claire stepped out and sat beside him.
"You haven't opened it," she said softly. Henry gave a dry chuckle. "I already know how this ends. Someone like me doesn't end up in a place like this. You think I made you an offer out of pity? I think I don't belong in your world." Claire looked ahead, then stood. "Come with me." They drove for over 30 minutes until they pulled up in front of a modest red brick building.
A painted sign read, "Thomas's Place, a safe space for every child."
Henry followed her inside.
The walls were bright, covered in handprints, painted animals.
Laughter echoed from down the hall.
Claire led him into a wide playroom filled with second-hand toys. "This place," Claire said quietly, "was named after the man who saved me.
I grew up in foster homes. One night, I ran away. It was freezing. I was 12. I curled up outside a church." She paused. "He found me.
An old man named Thomas.
He gave me his coat, sat with me all night.
I never saw him again, but that moment changed everything. I built this place because of him." She turned to face Henry.
"And last week someone else gave me a coat. You remind me of him. Not because of what you gave me, but because of who you are."
They stood in silence, surrounded by the sounds of life and laughter.
Claire touched his arm gently. "I don't need you to fit in a boardroom, Henry. I need you to remind people of this, of what it means to care. Henry didn't respond with words.
His eyes were wet now.
Quiet, unguarded tears. And then he nodded. Henry's first day at Infinity Group didn't start with fanfare.
Claire introduced him simply.
This is Henry Miles. He's here to help us build something more meaningful than just profit. Henry began by sharing his story. What it felt like to lose everything, to choose kindness anyway.
By the end of that first week, they were leaning forward.
Henry had a way of speaking that didn't preach. He asked questions that made people pause.
Slowly, a shift began.
Employees started seeking him out.
Henry listened, and when he spoke, he offered perspective. "You're not broken," he once told a young programmer.
"You're just tired. Being tired doesn't mean you're weak." Claire watched it all unfold.
She saw how laughter returned, how productivity rose because people felt seen. It wasn't long before Henry had an official space of his own. Outside of work, life began to rebuild.
With Claire's help, Henry put a down payment on a modest one-bedroom house. More importantly, it had room for Noah. Their first dinner in the new house was simple. "You kept your promise," Noah had said that night, tearing up. Henry hadn't answered. He couldn't, not with words.
As for Claire, she and Henry saw each other nearly every day. Then, without trying, it became more.
Weekend coffees turned into evenings spent watching old movies. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't fast. It just happened.
They were two people who had spent years building armor around themselves only to find comfort in the quiet company of someone who didn't ask for anything but presence. One late afternoon, as they stood on the rooftop watching the sunset, Claire said softly, "You've changed this place, Henry."
He chuckled. "No, I just reminded them what they already knew." She looked at him. "And reminded me, too."
Henry had just finished a workshop when a young man lingered after everyone else had left.
"Last month I was going to quit. Everything, life, I was done. But then I heard you speak and it stopped me. You said people don't need to be fixed. They just need to be heard. No one had ever said that to me before. If it weren't for you, I don't think I'd be here." Henry stepped forward and placed a hand on the young man's shoulder. "I'm really glad you are."
After the young man left, Henry sat down, the words echoing in his mind.
He had once wondered if he'd ever matter again.
Now he had his answer. The atrium of Infinity Group had never looked like this before. In place of corporate banners hung soft white drapes, strings of warm lights, and a massive sign that read, "One Kindness Day." On the center stage, Claire stepped up to the podium.
"This day isn't about metrics," she began. "It's about moments.
A year ago, I was standing at a bus stop in the freezing cold, and then, a man whom I had never met gave me his coat." She turned to the easel beside her and removed the cloth. There, behind a glass frame, was the very same coat. Beneath it, engraved on a bronze plaque, read, "One small act of kindness can rewrite a life." Claire's voice wavered.
"That act changed the course of my life.
And today, we honor the man who made it possible."
"Henry, will you come up here?" Henry stood slowly.
He made his way through the applause.
Claire pulled out a small envelope. "This belongs to you." Henry opened it.
Inside was the title deed to his new house. The room erupted in applause. Henry held up a hand.
"I actually have something, too." He pulled out a small box.
"You said this coat changed your life, but you changed mine.
Gave me back my name, my son, a roof, and hope." He opened the box. Inside was a silver ring. "Claire Langston, will you marry me?"
Claire stared at him, eyes filling, then laughed and nodded through tears.
"Yes."
The crowd rose in a standing ovation. 1 month later, they were married at Thomas's place. Children made paper flowers.
The chairs didn't match. But the room glowed with something money couldn't buy.
During the vows, Claire held Henry's hands.
"Once you gave me a coat," she said. "Tonight I give you my whole life." Henry couldn't speak. He just nodded, tears slipping down his cheeks.
The reception spilled out into the courtyard where children ran barefoot and strings of fairy lights danced in the twilight.
Someone snapped a photo.
Henry and Claire stood side by side, and beside them on an easel stood the old coat, silent, worn, and now immortalized. Sometimes the smallest gesture can echo further than we ever imagine.
Henry didn't have much, but he gave what he could. And in return, he didn't just change Claire's life.
He found love, purpose, and a new beginning.
Their story reminds us all kindness doesn't require perfection, just presence, just heart.